There is a small ritual humans perform every day, almost without thought, as if reciting a spell whose meaning has long been forgotten. You can watch it unfolding in grocery aisles, office hallways, and the quiet lobbies of apartment buildings. One person nods, the other smiles, and the words tumble out automatically. "Hi, how are you?" followed by the equally hollow reply, "Fine." It is a dance of well-polished masks, a choreography inherited from generations who also learned to hide. And though the steps are familiar, there is a strange loneliness tucked between them, a thin silence that lingers after the greeting has passed. Most people never notice this silence, though they feel it, an unspoken sense that something vital is missing. They walk away from these exchanges carrying the faint ache of being unseen, though they would never name it outright. After all, the ritual is supposed to maintain smoothness, keep the world moving, and protect everyone from the inconvenience of honesty. Yet if you look closely, you can see the truth flicker in their eyes. The words land nowhere. They drift into the air like dust, settling on nothing, connecting no one. It is not that people are cold or careless. They are simply on autopilot, drifting through conversations the same way one might walk through a familiar room in the dark, knowing the shape of it, but never stopping to notice its texture. But there comes a moment, sometimes subtle, when a person begins to wonder why so many interactions feel tired, scripted, or strangely weightless. Why, despite being surrounded by others, they still feel the faint hum of isolation beneath their skin. Why does their voice sometimes feel like a pebble dropped into a bottomless well? What most never realize is that this ache is not a personal flaw. It is a quiet reminder of what the heart has always known. Connection was never meant to be ritualistic. It was meant to be alive. And though the ritual may be common, it is not inevitable. There is another way to begin. A way that does not rely on performance, but on presence. A way that makes memory stir inside another person, as if waking from something half forgotten. And if you're willing to look deeper, the question emerges like a soft knocking on the mind's door. What is it that makes a person truly unforgettable? If you sit quietly long enough on a bus, in a cafe, or beside the slow hum of evening traffic, you can feel something beneath the surface of human interaction. Something older than words, older than the rituals that try to disguise it. It is the quiet hunger to be understood. Not praised, not admired, not even loved, in the way the movies tend to portray it. Understood, seen from the inside out without having to explain every corner of oneself. It is a longing so subtle, most people wouldn't dare confess it. Yet it follows them everywhere like a soft echo. To be understood is to feel the world pause for a moment, as if making room for your existence. It is the rare experience of watching another person's eyes change, not because you impressed them, but because something you said settled gently into their mind and found a place to rest. Most people go years without this moment. They speak their thoughts into the open air, only to watch them disappear without landing anywhere. And each time it happens, a small part of them folds inward, quietly believing their inner world might be too strange, too heavy, or too inconvenient to be held by someone else. Yet when understanding finally arrives, even in the smallest measure, it feels like warmth returning to cold hands. A soft recognition that whispers, "You're not absurd for feeling what you feel." Understanding does not require agreement, only presence. It is not a mirror that reflects your face back to you, but one that reflects your meaning. And when someone receives this reflection, they soften, often without knowing why. The mind settles, the breath deepens, the loneliness that once hummed quietly begins to dissolve. This is why being understood holds more power than love alone. Love can be loud, dramatic, even clumsy, but understanding is quiet and precise. It speaks directly to the place where people hide. It is a gift that cannot be faked or rushed or performed. It requires a person to step out of their rehearsed lines and into real attention. And when this attention is offered sincerely, it creates a connection that feels almost ancient, as though two inner worlds had always been waiting for the chance to meet. So the question lingers, gentle but persistent. Why does being understood touch us so deeply, so much deeper sometimes than being loved? There are cities so full of people that loneliness becomes part of the architecture. Brooklyn is one of them. The sidewalks rumble with footsteps, the cafes hum with conversations. And yet, if you pause and really look, you can see how many faces move through the day without ever being truly noticed. Maya was one of those faces. She drifted through crowded subway cars and open office layouts with the quiet ache of someone surrounded, yet somehow untouched. Conversations happened around her, to her, but rarely with her. They skimmed the surface like stones skipping across a river, never landing long enough to break the water. For months she carried that subtle emptiness, the kind that doesn't announce itself loudly, but lives in the pauses between words. She was friendly, polite, and always fine. And in a world built on ritualized exchanges, no one asked for anything deeper. But underneath her calm expression, something in her was quietly folding in on itself, becoming smaller with each conversation that ended before it ever truly began. One afternoon, during a brief escape to the office kitchen, just a woman, a paper cup, and the soft hum of fluorescent lights, someone stood beside her, a coworker she vaguely knew, the kind who shared elevators and deadlines, but never anything resembling a moment. They made the usual small noises people make before retreating back into their day. And then, unexpectedly, he turned to her, really looked at her, and said almost gently, "I get why that would overwhelm you. Not as a guess, not as an attempt to fill silence, but as someone who had listened long enough to understand." The sentence landed like a soft weight in her chest, so small, yet somehow it made space inside her that she hadn't realized was missing. Her shoulders loosened, her breath deepened. A laugh slipped out, not because anything was funny, but because something unguarded finally exhaled. She had not felt that in months. The sudden aliveness that comes when someone sees your inner world without being invited, without you having to perform your way into being understood. From that day forward, Maya noticed something she hadn't before. It wasn't his charm or intelligence that drew her toward him. It was the quiet safety of his presence. He didn't rush her words or decorate conversations with cleverness. He simply made room. And in that room, Maya found herself returning again and again, not to be impressed, but to be real. There is a moment, subtle but unmistakable, when a person hears the words, "I understand you," and something deep inside loosens. You can almost see it. The way the eyes soften, the breath steadies, the tension that once held their ribs tight slips away as if someone finally remembered to turn off a long-forgotten alarm. It is remarkable, really, how 4 quiet words can melt through layers of guardedness that years of conversation could never touch. Most people go through life speaking into rooms that never quite echo back. They share their worries, their confessions, their tangled thoughts, and somewhere between the sentences they brace themselves for dismissal, however gentle, however polite. They are used to being half heard, partially understood, or interpreted through someone else's impatience. So when the phrase arrives, simple, sincere, unadorned, it lands with the unmistakable weight of truth. I understand you, not as a performance, not as sympathy, but as recognition. This recognition is not an agreement. It does not mean you are correct. It means I see the shape of your world. To understand someone is to step quietly into the landscape of their reasoning, to trace the path they took to arrive where they stand. It is the rare gift of presence, given without the hunger to fix, outshine, or respond with brilliance. And because it is so rare, the heart treats it like a small miracle. When spoken sincerely, those 4 words dissolve the invisible barriers people spend years learning to erect. You can watch it happen. The jaw unsets, the shoulders lower, the voice becomes less guarded. A person shifts from defending their existence to inhabiting it. And in that shift, attraction begins. Not the glittery, performative kind, but the deep-rooted pull towards someone who makes the mind unclench. This is why understanding forms the foundation of trust. Not because it flatters, but because it allows someone to rest. Human beings are drawn almost instinctively to those who ease the quiet restlessness within them. And I understand you is the key that opens that door. And if this idea resonates, if you felt something settle in your chest as you heard it, then let it be known, quietly but clearly. A simple tap on like helps this message find the people who need it. Not out of obligation, but because even small gestures echo when they come from presence. When you're ready, we can continue. The next phrase reaches even deeper. There is a particular kind of loneliness people rarely name. The loneliness of speaking and watching your words evaporate before they reach another mind. Most individuals learn to expect this. They tell stories, share frustrations, confess fears, and somewhere between one sentence and the next, they can feel the listener slipping away. Not rudely, just drifting, distracted, already preparing their own reply. And so the speaker retreats piece by piece, until they offer only the safest fragments of themselves. They begin to talk the way someone tiptoes across ice, carefully, cautiously, hoping not to fall through. This is why the phrase, "that makes sense," feels almost medicinal. It arrives softly, without fanfare, but carries the warmth of a hand extended across a quiet divide. When someone hears those 3 words spoken sincerely, something inside them lifts, a sense of acknowledgement that whispers, your thoughts have landed somewhere. It is not agreement, not praise, not correction. It is validation that the inner logic of their world has been received. People underestimate the power of this validation. They think deep connection arises from shared opinions or identical beliefs, but more often it arises when someone feels their internal pathway has been understood, the winding trail of why they think or feel as they do. That makes sense, is a small clearing in the forest where a person can catch their breath. It does not demand alignment. It offers recognition. If you pay attention, you'll see how bodies respond. The shoulders relax first. Then the forehead smooths, as though the mind has been given permission to stop defending itself. The voice becomes steadier. A sense of companionship replaces the quiet vigilance so common in conversation. It is one of the gentle paradoxes of human nature. People grow attached not to those who impress them, but to those who make room for their inner landscape. Yet this phrase carries a quiet responsibility. It must be offered with presence, not tossed like confetti to fill space. When used carelessly, it crumbles, losing all the weight that sincerity gives it. But when spoken with genuine attention, it becomes a bridge, short, simple, but strong enough for vulnerability to cross. And so the question naturally follows. What happens when this bridge is offered in moments of tension, disagreement, or conflict? The answer, as it turns out, begins with a man in Chicago. There are people who move through the world wrapped in an aura of authority they never question. Daniel was one of them. In the glass-walled offices of downtown Chicago, he had built a reputation as sharp, efficient, and undeniably competent. But beneath that competence lingered a quiet tension. Meetings with him felt like entering a room where the air was just a little too still. People chose their words carefully, aware of the unspoken expectation to stay within his precise lines. Daniel never intended to intimidate. It was simply the armor he had worn for years, polished, professional, impenetrable. He believed leadership meant certainty, and certainty meant holding ground. But certainty, for all its confidence, can cast long shadows over those who wish to step into the light. Then came the morning when everything shifted. A routine team meeting, a whiteboard cluttered with ideas, and a junior colleague, a soft-spoken analyst barely a year into the job, hesitantly challenged one of Daniel's proposals. It was the kind of moment that could have gone unnoticed, swallowed by the rhythm of office life, yet something different happened. Daniel paused. The room held its breath, and instead of reinforcing his position, he said quietly, "You're right about that part." The effect was instantaneous. You could almost feel the tension lift, like a storm cloud passing. People leaned forward, shoulders dropped. A sense of relief, subtle but unmistakable, rippled through the room. In that small gesture, Daniel had laid down a sword he didn't realize he'd been holding. Over the next weeks, he noticed a shift he couldn't quite explain. Teammates sought him out more often, not out of obligation, but genuine trust. Conversations grew easier. Ideas flowed with a freedom that surprised him. The very people who had once tiptoed around him now approached him with a kind of warmth he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't that Daniel had softened. It was that he had become safe. If this realization stirs something in you, even slightly, then you may want to stay close. And if the story resonates, consider subscribing to this channel, not out of habit, but to keep traveling deeper into this unfolding understanding. Because the next word in this journey doesn't merely shift conversation, it transforms them. There is a peculiar tension that rises in most conversations the moment disagreement enters the room. You can see it in the way bodies stiffen, voices sharpen, and minds retreat into the old familiar instinct. Defend, justify, correct. Humans have inherited this reflex from ancient days when standing one's ground meant survival. Yet now it mostly shows up in kitchen debates, office meetings, and quiet car rides where two people drift into silence without knowing how they got there. In these moments, everyone believes they are fighting for truth, yet what they are really fighting for is to be acknowledged. It is astonishing how quickly the atmosphere changes when someone pauses, takes a breath, and says, "You're right," not as surrender, not as manipulation, but as a genuine recognition that the other person has touched a piece of truth, however small, however inconvenient. The words act like a soft cloth wiping steam off a mirror. Suddenly, clarity returns. The room, once thick with defensiveness, becomes lighter, softer, almost warm. Most people don't admit it aloud, but they long to hear those two words. "You're right" is not an admission of weakness. It is an act of spaciousness. It shows that pride has loosened its grip, that the ego has taken a gentle step back. making room for connection to step forward. When spoken sincerely, it disarms the quiet wars people carry inside. The need to appear capable, the fear of being unseen, the ache of feeling misunderstood. In truth, emotional intelligence is not built from perfectly crafted arguments, but from moments like this. Moments when someone values truth more than victory. And because such humility is rare, it becomes magnetic. People lean toward those who don't need to win every battle, who aren't threatened by another's insight, who can set their ego aside long enough to let understanding rise to the surface. When someone says, "You're right," they're not just acknowledging a fact. They're acknowledging you, your thinking, your perception, your humanity. That acknowledgement is what dissolves conflict, what opens conversation, what transforms the sharp edges of an argument into something unexpectedly gentle. And so the question arises, almost tenderly, if validation softens conflict this easily, what would happen if someone offered something even deeper? Not agreement, but presence. The answer begins with three deceptively simple words, spoken far too rarely. I'm listening. In a world so crowded with noise, the act of listening has become almost mythic. Everyone is speaking, into phones, across tables, through screens glowing late into the night. Words spill constantly, yet so few of them ever land. Most conversations feel like overlapping monologues, each person waiting politely for their turn to re-enter the spotlight. But real listening, the kind that quiets the room, has become a scarcity more valuable than almost anything else. When someone says, "I'm listening," and means it, something extraordinary happens. The space between two people shifts. Time seems to move slower, as if the world is holding its breath to make room for the truth about to be spoken. The listener isn't rehearsing responses or scanning for flaws. They are simply present, meeting the other person's inner world with curiosity instead of control. And in that presence, a person begins to unfold. The voice steadies, the heart unclenches. Thoughts, once tangled, begin to arrange themselves into something honest. Listening is not passive. It is attentive stillness. It is the quiet offering of space in a world that constantly takes it away. People return again and again to those who listen, not because they expect solutions, but because they feel real in the presence of someone who isn't trying to reshape them. Being truly heard is one of the closest things to being loved. And you can watch the transformation in real time. Someone who has been holding their breath for years, emotionally if not literally, finally exhales. Their shoulders are lower, their eyes soften. There is a small, unmistakable shift, like a lamp being turned on in a dim room. Listening, sincere listening, reminds people that their presence matters. But listening also does something else. It awakens. It pulls someone out of the sleepwalk of routine phrases and mechanical replies. It invites them back into themselves. And once awakened, they begin to speak not from reflex, but from truth. And if something in you stirs while hearing this, if a single sentence or feeling settled quietly inside you, then don't let it pass unnoticed. Leave a comment with one word that captures how you feel right now. Not for algorithmic reasons, but because naming a feeling often anchors it in memory. Because the journey does not end with listening. There is a phrase ahead that breaks routine so sharply, so beautifully. It brings conversations fully into the living moment. There is a moment that arrives in nearly every conversation when the mind slips quietly into autopilot. You can see it in the gentle drift of the eyes, the predictable rhythm of responses, the rehearsed politeness that carries people through the day like a gentle conveyor belt. Most social exchanges settle into this gray zone, pleasant, forgettable, and entirely unalive. People don't choose this state. They simply fall into it, lulled by routine and the soft comfort of the familiar. But beneath that familiarity is a growing dullness, the sense that nothing has truly been shared. Then comes a phrase that snaps the mind awake. Tell me something good. It arrives like a spark thrown into dry grass, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniably disruptive. It interrupts the script. Suddenly, the usual pathways of conversation are blocked, and the mind must take a new road. The person hearing it pauses, blinking as though someone gently tapped their consciousness on the shoulder. You can almost see the moment they shift from autopilot to awareness. Something in them begins searching through the clutter of the day, through memory, through recent joys or small curiosities, for something real. This search is magic. It opens a door, even if the something good they choose is tiny. A warm cup of coffee, a laugh with a friend, a quiet sunrise glimpsed half awake. It comes from a place deeper than routine. The phrase forces reflection, but not in a heavy-handed way. It awakens the gentle parts of the mind that have been sleeping. And when a person speaks from that place, they speak from truth. The shift is immediate. Their tone changes. Their eyes brighten. They step into the present moment fully, and the one who asked the question becomes something rare. A person who disrupts sleepwalking, not with confrontation, but with invitation. Conversation becomes color again, not grayscale. You can feel the connection widen, not because the topic is grand, but because it is real. And beneath this lies a simple human truth. People remember those who wake them up, not with alarm bells, but with curiosity, not with intensity, but with warmth. Tell me something good is not a technique. It's a doorway, a small one perhaps. But sometimes a small doorway leads to a vast landscape. The natural question that emerges is gentle, but insistent. If a single phrase can revive a moment, what could it do to an entire relationship? Attraction is often mistaken for sparkle. The clever remark, the impressive story, the practiced charm that glitters just enough to catch someone's attention. But the truth, the one most people sense but rarely articulate, is that attraction is far quieter than that. It lives not in the performance, but in the pause, in the feeling of ease that settles over someone when they no longer need to guard themselves, in the soft certainty that they can breathe fully in another's presence. Emotional safety is the hidden architecture behind every meaningful bond. It is the invisible structure that holds connection upright. When someone feels safe, they reveal the parts of themselves they normally hide. The scattered thoughts, the awkward stories, the fragile truths they've kept tucked away. Safety is what makes the shoulders unclench, what slows the frantic inner dialogue, what replaces the instinct to impress with the instinct to be. And when a person can be without fear, they feel drawn naturally, instinctively, to the one who made that possible. The surprising paradox is that this kind of attraction cannot be performed. It cannot be faked or be forced. The more someone tries to be magnetic, the more strain appears at the edges of their presence. People can sense this strain instantly, even if they can't explain it. It creates a quiet pressure, a feeling of being evaluated or managed. But the moment someone stops trying, when they let go of the need to be admired and simply become a steady, open space, something changes. The atmosphere softens. The connection deepens. The other person relaxes into themselves, and in doing so, relaxes into you. This is why authenticity feels so disarming. People carry so much tension, so much armor, that encountering someone who doesn't need to perform feels like stumbling into sunlight after a long winter. It warms without being overwhelming. It comforts without demanding. And in that warmth, a person begins to unfurl. If this idea sinks into you, if something in it feels true or familiar, then let the instinct guide you. Share this video with someone who might need to hear this today. Not for numbers or reach, but because safety grows when it is passed from person to person. And stay close, because understanding how emotional safety works is only the beginning. The question now becomes, how does one embody this consistently until presence itself becomes a kind of home for others? There is a particular exhaustion that settles into a person after years spent performing. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It simply shows up as a subtle tightness in the shoulders, a heaviness behind the eyes, a quiet dread before conversations that should feel easy. Most people don't realize they're performing, only that they are strangely tired all the time. They smile a little too quickly, speak a little too brightly, laugh a little too loudly, all in the hope that someone, anyone, will sense their worth without requiring them to strip away their armor. But connection was never meant to be a stage play. It was meant to be a shared moment of reality. People often believe that others remember them for their sparkle, the clever line delivered at the right time, the charm polished to an easy shine. Yet memory works differently. Human beings recall the ones who made them feel at ease, the ones who didn't demand a performance in return. Those rare individuals who seem to walk through the world with a soft sense of presence rather than a loud sense of self. There is a curious paradox hidden in this. The more a person tries to impress, the more forgettable they become. Performance has sharp edges, and people instinctively step back from sharpness. But someone who offers steadiness, someone who can be still, someone who listens without preparing a reply, that person becomes quietly unforgettable. They become a place where others can rest. This is not something dramatic. It does not require exceptional talent or perfect timing. It is simply the art of allowing others to be themselves. Presence, when it is real, has a gravitational pull. People return to it instinctively, the way plants turn toward light without needing instruction. And if you've made it this far, if you feel something softening inside you as these ideas settle, then take a moment with this thought. When this ends, re-watch the first minute. You'll hear it with a different heart. Sometimes the message you missed the first time is the one that finds you when you're finally ready to hear it. Because this journey is not about words alone. It's about remembering something the world taught you to forget. Connection begins not with impressing, but with recognizing. And that recognition leads us to the final realization, the quiet truth that binds all of this together. If you pay attention to the quietest moments between people, those soft places where conversation slows, where breath steadies, where eyes linger without urgency, you will notice something profound. Love, in its most elemental form, is not performance. It is recognition. It is the moment when one human being looks at another and truly sees them, not as a role, not as a mask, not as a collection of expectations, but as the unmistakable shape of a soul. Most people go through life believing love must be earned through achievement or charm or brilliance. They chase after admiration the way a child chases fireflies, quickly, breathlessly, always one step behind. But admiration is fickle. Recognition is not. Recognition is the warm knowing that someone has stepped into your world without trying to rearrange it. It is the soft acknowledgement that your inner landscape, your fears, your joys, your contradictions, make sense to someone else. When you embody the words at the heart of this journey, I understand you. That makes sense. You're right. I'm listening. You stop trying to attract people and begin allowing them. You stop performing and begin receiving. You stop seeking validation and begin offering it. And in this offering, something miraculous happens. Others blossom in your presence without you having to lift a single petal. This is the quiet alchemy of human connection. People are not drawn to those who overwhelm them with brilliance, but to those who remind them of their own light. They gravitate toward the ones who let them be real, the ones who reflect back not perfection, but humanity. And in that reflection, they feel something ancient and familiar, a feeling the world often confuses with romance, but which is deeper and broader than that. It is recognition. And recognition, when given sincerely, is love in its most unadorned form. Love not as possession. Love not as performance. Love not as a promise wrapped in grand gestures. But love is the simple, startling miracle of being seen. And so this journey closes the way all quiet truths do, not with a grand finale, but with a gentle, steady knowing. When you offer presence instead of performance, recognition instead of approval, listening instead of control, you become a place where others feel alive. And that, more than anything, is what makes a person unforgettable.